Okay, we have the incredible Joel Schafer on the podcast today. I am just so grateful that you took the time to do this with me. Truly, truly. I told you in the email that I sent to you that I listened to you on another podcast and went on to listen to that same conversation about 35, 40 times just so that it would rewire my brain a little bit. It was just so mind blowing. My brain almost exploded. And so I had to reach out. I had no choice but to reach out to you. So thank you again for coming on to the podcast, Joel.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's an honor to meet you, and I'm glad you felt called to connect. And I'm glad that this way of this languaging of things resonates for you, and I look forward to talking more about it.
Absolutely. I think it's going to resonate with my listeners very deeply because it's a lot of women who are preparing for birth, new moms, parents, and or people who are want to birth something beautiful into this world. I'm excited for them to hear what you have to say. I really felt like it was a transmission
Hmm.
into my life, into my reality. I'm excited for the listeners to hear it. Before we get started into the many questions that I have, I would love for you to just let us know how you got to the place that you are right now, and your background and some of your experiences.
Yeah, thank you. At a really young age, I met a shaman. I was 16, and I really walked away from everything in order to train with him. And he was very sensitive to the world and was able to help me understand what kind of energetic traps exist and how to avoid them, how to not, get lost in the identifying with an archetype or an ego, and just how to be very sensitive to who you hang out with. And it just was a really intense training, and it was very sort of dangerous in a sense that I really became a hermit and I wouldn't hang out with people except for people like him. And so I became sort of stuck up about energy, and so you go through these processes in which you isolate yourself when you start to learn certain things. So I had to heal from that, and I had a lot of different shamans I sought out eventually to try to balance what had happened to me early on. And it was uncomfortable, a lot of scary times in my life where I'd really become so isolated that I just didn't trust people. And I just got very, I went through some intense alone time, which proved to be really valuable. But I jumped from different teachers and would live with them in person and become like their most devoted apprentice. And I just really was focused on making sure that I understood that there was more to this world than what the veneer of society sort of offers us as what's available. And so the Carlos Castaneda material and also Taisha Abelar and Florinda Donner Grau are apprentices of a man named Juan Matus, who my elder was associated with. And so I got a really up close, up front training with really powerful shamans and sorcerers in New Mexico and Texas. And then I ended up training with Carlos Castaneda's cohorts and students as well. And so I've just been doing this, as my priority since I was 16. I have never really deviated, but I did raise children in an alternative way. And my wife was a very natural mother and very earth-based. So I learned a lot from her. And we had to get out of each group as they got culty, right? So it started out usually kind of cool, and then it would not be cool eventually, and it was really intense. And so she would help me realize we needed to leave, or I'd help her realize we needed to leave this group. And so there's a little bit of a trauma bond in our relationship because of it, but we're working with people to heal that as well. And so we believed at a young age that, having children was a really important choice to make, because Toltecs don't necessarily suggest that you do that unless it's really strong and guided, because there are energetic dynamics that most people aren't aware of that occur when you do bring a child into this world, and they're not usually explained to them. And so we were aware of these things at a very young age. And when we'd never planned on having kids, but then we got really guided to within the early stages of our marriage. So it became a really beautiful thing to come out of that and move into the acceptance of that gift. And so we did raise our children in pretty magical ways, but it was also within the shamanic communities. that we had to get in and out of. And so there's trauma there as well. But I don't think kids are meant to be trauma free. I think it's what prepares them for life. So we don't beat ourselves up too much for our past.
Such an interesting perspective on kids are not meant to be trauma free, lifting so much guilt and shame for so many parents, including myself. Yeah,
Yeah.
including
Yeah.
myself. Can you tell me a little bit about how you approached the birth? Because it sounds like you were so conscious that
Mm.
bringing life into this world is significant and sacred. So I'd love to hear how you and your wife prepared for that.
We just were, well, there was fear of the medical system itself. We had a lot of concerns about the way things work inside of that world. Unfortunately, we had a stillborn at 6 months, and so our first birth was in a hospital in an emergency, and our second child we had in a midwife center, and there was a lot of midwives that were there. For some reason, the room was filled with people because the dogs were howling as in the alley as my daughter was coming in. And like so many dogs were just howling and were part of this birth. And my daughter came out. I caught her with the assistance of a doula, and then my daughter just came out and stared in the eyes of every person in that room, like just no tears, just and it was so crazy to watch, and it really affected the whole birthing center. And so, yeah, that was our first. Our second, we had at home. The doula was a few, or the midwife was in the next room, and the doulas were a few houses away, or the doula. But my wife just breathed without waking any of us up through her entire labor because she's just like capable of going into unique states of perception. So by the time she let us know, it was already fully happening. And then yeah, we had champagne and waffles a few hours later. It was really crazy. We didn't do it the way you were supposed to. We had a midwife come from out of state because we didn't trust anybody at the time. So a lot of the fear that we were in around unconsciousness or medical systems, it led to us kind of being a little risky on some level. But it was just so beautiful to understand how natural of awareness she has and how she was able to like intuit what was needed. I was pretty afraid of not doing things, in a way that could get us in trouble and all that. But it ended up working out, although when we went to turn in that information and stuff, it was like, what did you had a child at home, this midwife isn't registered. But yeah, that was our two children came in that way.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm really sorry to hear about the stillborn
Yeah.
experience. I heard you speak about how children will choose their
Yeah.
parents, and I'd love for you to elaborate on that.
Yeah, in the Native American tradition that we were trained in, they call it the shining, that a child will put a shining on a mother, and that shining will be guided to the father. And it's not necessarily ideal, necessarily this perfect companion. It's just an assignment, and the shamans believe that there are signs and omens and ways of reading that and becoming aware. Like if you go into sweat lodge, there certain things will happen if you're pregnant and you don't know it. Like the sweat lodge, the stone will break if you're going to have twins, and different things that prove to be really accurate often for really powerful people to receive guidance on these things. And it's just the idea that children don't only choose their mother, but they guide the mother to the father. And it has to do with contracts and kind of like this place is an obstacle course, and the child is choosing its obstacle course, and it has to be designed in a particular way. And so whether people are aware of the shining or not, some part of them knows and is on a subconscious level is being guided by these things, whether they tap into the awareness of it. But to know ahead of time is really powerful. Like when our son was conceived, our second living child, this bird in the middle of the night came to the window and was singing the sweetest song in like the suburbs of El Paso in the dark while we were conceiving our son. And then throughout the pregnancy, my wife was all these marks were showing up on her every morning, and we were living with a medicine woman in El Paso. and she was checking out these marks, and there were all these different phases of the moon and different sizes and in different parts of her body. And there was we trying to figure out if there was a practical way in which these things were happening. But just when you're inside of magical people's lives who are part of, you know, difficult healings and are aware of energy, you start to have magic spill over into the physical. And so when you're working with spirits, these little shinings, these children are spirits that are conscious prior to coming into conception. But Toltecs do say life begins at the moment of conception, as far as that idea that how consciousness steps up to the plate.
So beautiful to think of. There is this connection before
Yeah.
the baby is even conceived. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about what the fears were that you and your wife were experiencing about the medical system?
I think it was just an intuition at that age, but it proved to be true in that when my daughter was quite young, like 3 weeks or so, she had some bruises and she was throwing up, and we took her in, and they knew that we didn't do the normal protocols, and they immediately rushed her in, saying that because she wasn't given a vitamin K shot that she was going to die any second. And all that turned out to not be true, because the nurse later said after giving her the vitamin K shot, her levels were normal instantly, and it would have taken a lot longer. So the first test that they gave was inaccurate, and they wouldn't let her leave. And she was just being jabbed, with IVs and being forced. My wife was so stressed that breast milk wasn't happening, and then they were forcing her to take stuff that her body was rejecting. And so she was losing weight, and then they wouldn't let her check out or let us check out. And they told us if we did try to take her that we would, they would involve like CPS and stuff. So we were all of a sudden given an up close version of how dangerous it is to involve these people in your life. I can't say for sure what the bruising and the puking was and how it would have resolved naturally. I don't claim to understand it, but now that I work with Kelly Brogan and different people, I'm like, there's so many things that we just were lied to, and so much fear that's placed on us and projections. It was a really scary time for us. We ended up bringing a shaman in to help us, and he did some really powerful work. And hours later, a doctor we'd never met came in and said, I'm overriding all these nurses and doctors, and I'm having your daughter released from here because I don't think it's a good place for her to be. And so they went against their protocols. And that was amazing to witness just how quickly that effective that shaman's work was for us. And that really helped me to understand the power of prayer and intention and how to be focused and deal with these forces that are unconscious. The kind of the freaky part of what we learned later is we were in a town that had a very well-known satanic cult that consisted of 20 doctors and 20 lawyers. And they'd been running this cult for hundreds of years. And it's very much runs the town in New Mexico. And it's still going on today. It's infiltrated the entire government of that area. There's no way to sort of take it down. And there's a lot of this in the world. There's people that have assumed positions of power that are using their power to kind of counteract natural people. And so I believe the doctor that took the test manipulated the test results, but I can't say for sure. But we were in a very scary place, and it was really hard to come to terms with, yeah, just how cold of an environment it can be.
I think there is so much fear when it comes to birth.
Yeah.
And it's like birth should really be a celebration when the community comes around the parents, especially the mother, to cocoon the mother and help her do her work and help the baby do what it's meant to be doing. And there just seems to be so much intervention and disturbance and poking and prodding in that whole experience. And there's a statistic that my friend and I, who we started this birth preparation program together, we can't get over it. 45% of women describe their birth as traumatic. That's so wild to me.
Really.
When it's really what I experience and what many women experience when they take an empowered approach to
Yeah.
their birth, that it is the most euphoric experience, that it can be the moment where you get in touch with who you really are as a human, as a mother, where you get in touch with your power, where you get in touch with what you're capable of doing, that your body is this portal, this vessel that can create life, you know, and it prepares you for challenges in motherhood and in parenthood.
Yeah.
And so what is like, I feel like, you know, is it just our system? Is it the paradigm? Is it the education? Like, what is happening on an energetic level for so much trauma to come into this experience?
Yeah, I mean, the shamans I work with would say it's spiritual warfare. We're being interfered with on so many levels to usher us into a soulless environment potentially. It's like anti-life. This wouldn't be this advanced if it wasn't intentional. It's not just a misunderstanding, you know, and then coming to terms with that is what's really disturbing is you have to sort of face that. And that doesn't mean that you know, it doesn't, it's not, I'm not saying it's a good versus evil thing. It's just a predator thing. We are predators. There's something higher on the food chain than us that is attempting to control us. And if it gets bad enough, you know, we might wake up to it, but it's done so slowly and so generationally that it just keeps getting integrated and accepted. And so Toltec say they're one of the few people that really are willing to oppose this force by learning to silence their mind, then that system can't control them as individuals. But you become really lonely when you're no longer in the hive mind. You don't relate to people who are talking about the weather or small talk or, you know, so you become very alert and it's like infinity is in front of you at all times. You become very active in your dreams and you just start to realize that there's no point in following the ups and downs of your fellow mankind, and you start going inward. And the more you do this, the more aware you are of the puppetry that's occurring. You get to see it from like a more distant view, and you develop the stomach for it to be able to handle it without being overwhelmed by the 45%. You start to understand, of course, it's like that. Like it wouldn't, things wouldn't look like this if that wasn't how things are, right? So it allows for these fear-based programs to run. And it's so well done that it doesn't seem like a human mind that built this. It's like something more advanced than us has ensnared us in its, and so Toltecs say when you have a lot of fear, it's not actually yours. It's just the program lending its fear to you. And so it's like being able to discern the difference between your natural mind and this generic mind, which we call the hive mind. And once you're able to master silence and spend time turning off your thoughts and hanging out in pure feelings, then everything shifts and you're no longer at odds with the situation. You just see that it's like designed as an obstacle course and it's not meant for everyone to become aware of. It's designed actually for just some of us to graduate while others are going to continue to be entangled in it. And then you learn to make peace with the opportunity and you're thankful that you can see through the veil instead of trying to wake other people up to it. And then it's more of the 100th monkey thing. The more you become free of it, the more permission you're giving to others to do the same rather than frantically try and awaken humanity. You start to understand there's a much more healthy way to go about it. Otherwise, you would be attached to outcome, and attachment to outcome leads to just so much suffering. And in reality, we're here to align with a path of heart and discover purpose within a very challenging environment in order to prepare us for the afterlife. So this isn't the only dream. There's other visions, there's other dreams. And what the program is doing is trying to keep us in so much fear that we don't discover those other layers of the onion and get to know the Earth Mother as a sentient creature that can communicate and take your pain and heal you and guide you in all these magical ways. But parents that find a way to discover balance, boundaries, healthy communication, and raise their children in consciousness and awareness, knowing that they're going to be messy along the way and that trauma is meant to get in there, then you can have a very evolutionary family, and that affects people. They see it out in the world. They don't know what to how to label it necessarily, but on some level it gives people permission. Little kids will see your light and they'll realize it's different than their family, and they'll create a longing in them to have something more meaningful, and that longing will lead to how they choose their partner. All these different things is just permission given by being a lighthouse in the world.
Yeah, it reminds me of just that statement, this is not happening to you, this is happening for you.
Absolutely.
I had my first medicine journey
Mm.
just last summer, very much a newbie when it comes to plant power and plant medicine and psychedelics and all of that stuff. But the message was so clear that it's like you are either grateful for all of it, every single part of it. You cannot just be grateful for this little segment and that little piece. And you're either grateful for all of it and it's all happening for you or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, it's all a miracle, and we're just so fortunate to be alive. And shamans say that we spend our lives being offended by one thing or another, and that's what keeps us from being energized, is that we're at odds with the world. So happy that you discovered that. It's really the designer, the creator force has designed this in it's a perfectly set up training for us to be able to become aware of what we are. And that's the conditioning, is that we've been given a limited version of what we are and what we're capable of. So when Don Juan trained Carlos, he tried to, it's like he was teaching him all this shamanic stuff because Carlos needed a version, a story in order to understand what was happening to him. But it's not even shamanism, it's just infinite potential as an energetic creature of awareness. And the shamanism is almost just like a way of giving you some system in which to follow, but it's not necessary. It could be through being a midwife or being an artist or being, just a poet. The infinite potential to tap is just available through our own creative means.
I want to go a little bit deeper into this because I think it's so relevant to the birth experience, that infinite potential. We're so conditioned to think that there's one way to birth our
Yeah,
babies.
yeah,
And like since childhood, I didn't even question it until a friend of mine had her babies at home. And then there's this infinite potential of how you can birth your babies, of how you can, bring new life into this reality. I saw a documentary of women giving birth in the ocean with dolphins coming to be present. That's possible. Women who have orgasms as they birth their baby, who laugh, who
yeah.
growl, who have this like psychedelic experience. That's possible too.
Oh,
It's so wild how we're conditioned that there's one way and it's an emergency, as you said.
mm,
And
you
it's
know,
scary and it's fear based. And thank God everyone lived. And thank God the baby got out safely if that's what happens. And it's all based around fear, which I think is one of the main ways that we are controlled.
yeah, yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, we are psychedelic creatures. We don't need mushrooms or medicine in order to access altered states. And birthing can be that rite of passage for women, is to discover their ability to move into other layers of the onion while they're inside of that transformation. As that portal delivering life, it's basically a moment of birthing a world. Each person is a world. They're a reality in their own. And so we have our own reality tunnels that we can travel. We don't need to be associating with the collective reality tunnel. We can individuate and have our own. And that's the power of our perception, is our perspective shifts. And so what you're in the blueprint you're providing to your child through that, how you deliver, like the word deliver, and what that is you know, every feeling is transmitted throughout the whole pregnancy, but also especially in that moment, and so Yeah, some children, their contract is to be traumatized right away. That was the circumcision. Like everything's pretty intense. We just take that shit for normal, but it's really powerful means to traumatize people and disconnect the parents from their intuition. We're gonna take your child away and we're gonna chop this part of their body off, and they're just like, oh, okay, that's standard, right? That just these concepts are so strange. So the more we free ourselves from these stories, then the more natural we can move through the process and just creating, whether it ends up being in a hospital, you can still create your own reality tunnel as a couple, bringing your child in. So even in situations where you no longer have say over where you were birthing for whatever reason, there's always an opportunity to liberate from the hypnosis and to make it as magical as possible. So like a lot of people discover their power in jail or in prison. They become aware there because they've kind of reached a point where there's no distractions, or they choose to come out of distraction because there's so few. And so the spirit will always provide a window of opportunity in every moment. And so rather than beating ourselves up with shame or guilt and wishing we had done things differently, we just only were so far along in our awareness within the conditions that we had. And so we brought a lot of fear into our child's lives around the matrix and the medical system, and we were dysregulated because we thought the world was out to get us, and so it's just, but we were really young, and that's where we were at. And so just being able to understand and make peace with all of these different events and how they came to be, they serve as, now my daughter's 22 and she's coming out of all that fear that was put on her. And it's beautiful to watch, like she needed to go through that rite of passage. I wish sometimes I could go back and do it differently, and I do, there's ways to go back and like do theater work where you say different things. And in a way, you do change the past, and it does help them come out of stuff by you doing the work. Well, the more creative we are. But yeah, just bringing awareness to those that are ready of how capable you are of navigating natural situations and giving birth its position as a natural act rather than this freakish thing that needs to be monitored. But it all is built in the same storylines around that, without vaccines, we wouldn't be here. Like vaccines saved the world from these things that none of that's true. But that's what keeps people locked into these ideas that scientists and doctors know better, is because they're able to use their microscopes to explain things. But when you look at what their studies are, there's no controls. They're lying. They want an outcome in those tests that leads them to becoming deceivers of their own, of themselves. And so if you get enough people agreeing that birth is dangerous and it needs to be monitored, like what they're trying to do with midwives to make sure they get closer and closer to the system, it's just basically a fear of women reclaiming their power in this realm, because women are very powerful. Women have an advantage over men when it comes to dreaming and spiritual practices. And so there's great pressure on women to not become wild and aware, whether it's through the media or just through this type of hypnosis that I think is coming from other layers of the onion. Part of that way of freeing ourselves is to become limitless in how we go about healthcare and childcare. And that includes obviously the whole pregnancy and the birth.
Yeah, when I became pregnant, I started having very interesting dreams, dreaming in ways that I haven't my whole life.
Yeah.
And also this is so interesting. I used to suck my thumb as a child as a way of self-soothing.
Yeah.
And I woke up one day during my first pregnancy and my thumb was in my mouth.
Wow.
I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting." There's this like almost like a regression back to our childhood as women, but we kind of skipped over it. But you're mentioning dreaming, but we haven't really talked about the power of our dreams. And this is, I think, an area that we're oblivious to in modern society. I took a dream working course, I think like 10 years ago, but it's just so superficial compared to what I've heard you speak about. It's more, how can I help patients or people or clients work through relational dysfunction, or is there something that they need to pay attention to that keeps coming up in their dreams? Are there themes that keep coming up in their dreams? Are there sensations and feelings that are really strong that keep coming up in their dreams? Let's pay attention to that. And that was kind of the gist. It was based on Jungian psychology. I did think that was really powerful in and of itself. And I did a few practices that I found were really powerful, but it was really just so superficial compared to what I've heard you talk about. So I'd love for you to give the listeners, in a way we can digest, like someone who's never heard of Carlos Castaneda, or someone who's never, even contemplated that dreams are significant.
Thank you. Yeah. So Toltec say that you can take ordinary dreams and make them magical ways of interacting with this realm. So like Dr. Berlando would use his dream time when he was assisting patients. He would visit them and and he would turn into like a tornado above their bodies, and he was using his dreaming body in order to assist his patient, even though they weren't in the same room, they were in the same house or something. And so he was able to assist on a level that he didn't even understand until he woke up the next day and went to check on the patient and remembered the dream. And I hope I'm getting this right, but it's just, there's a way to interact on these in these other layers, and it starts with being conscious in your dreams, or even being slightly conscious. And so dreams are not, I don't, like, shamans are functional schizophrenics, right? So this word schizophrenic or bipolar or all the labels that have been given to us are just man-made concepts. And so we do want our perception to move freely. And so a lot of the people that are most gifted are in mental wards, that they just weren't given the proper training with their capacity to move their perception. So anytime your perception moves really far, you're properly dreaming even though you're awake. We call it dreaming awake. But there's a way to become conscious in your dreams to where you're aware that you may be in a really weird dream and you think it's the normal day, and you're like can't find your keys, and then you find them and it's the remote control, and you're trying to turn on your car with the remote control from your TV, and it's like something's wrong here, but you can't figure it out. And then that's actually, these beings are creating a story to try to get you to realize that you're in a dream. When you're dreaming, you're interacting with beings from other worlds, and they have an advantage because they're capable dreamers and they live much longer lifespans than us. And they want to form relationships and teach you how to become aware in your dreams. But we are so unaware of what's going on, and our attention isn't honed to be able to stay conscious while we're in these altered states. And so I learn over time, and I'm very much a novice compared to what Castaneda revealed to the world. But there's these gates of dreaming that you can cross, and you can learn to become conscious in your dreams and go to sleep in one dream in the same position as you want to sleep in your bed, and then wake up in another dream, and then go to sleep again in the same position as you want to sleep in the previous dreams. And you'll wake up and you'll be in a dream that's more real than the one you and I are in right now. There are worlds upon worlds upon worlds for us to travel inside of, and something has a hold of us and is keeping us in just this one layer. And if we don't remember the power of dreams, and if we don't learn to travel again, then we will perish out of self-destruction. We will not be able to continue. And I don't believe that will happen, because we're too powerful of creatures to not wake up to what's happening to us. And so we're inside of this spiritual warfare where something's interfering with our ability to become conscious in the way that I'm referring to. But it's so difficult to achieve what I'm talking about, that there's all these baby steps, and it takes decades. And that's what I teach. I help people to find the first step, and then the second, instead of trying to tackle the Castaneda material and understand it. I'm like an interpreter. It's a little ahead of its time still, but where like yoga and meditation has been popular, I think lucid dreaming and shamanic movement are going to become really sought after because it's the veil is lifting as needed for those that are ready to look through it. It's getting gossamer thin, and we're going to be able to come to terms with this energetic place. And dreams are portals, just like women are portals. And so women have an advantage. Having a womb is the most evolved evolutionary organ, and women determine our evolution by what they focus on. And so there's been great fear about women becoming powerful, like Salem witch trials and different storylines that make it seem scary. And so religion has become very powerful, or science, all these things that keep us from unlocking the secrets of the power. And I'm not saying there aren't people that misuse their power, women and men, absolutely. In fact, that's what we're dealing with, is these people who have chosen power in this life. Toltec seek power in the afterlife, so they don't take much from this place. They're just here to heal, to regulate their nervous system and be able to use dreams in magical ways. But it all just starts with learning to get quiet and learning to move beyond the meditation. So my elder would say, rather than meditate, learn to focus. If you can stay focused for long periods of time, you're honing your dreaming attention, because this is a dream that you and I are in right now. Toltec say it's a vision. We're having a vision, a collective one. But there's a way to move into other visions and have conversations, like how Beethoven discovered the music that he created was through going into other layers and hearing it. He didn't even create it, he just heard it. It's a transmission. Every invention is given. And so our ability to reclaim our imagination and our creativity is what makes it possible to become so youthful. As you move into your elder years, everything comes together. As we get older, we're meant to become more energetic, less physical as we transition. And that's when the medicine really kicks in, if you've been preparing or are willing to prepare at that time to move into these, to tap the astral body, to understand there's a dreaming body that you can utilize as a healer or as a seer or a remote viewer. And then the Earth Mother, rather than manifest your life, ask her to tell you what your purpose is and receive that guidance. And dreams will become magical. You'll be informed. You'll start flying in your dreams. You'll start doing very fun, exciting things, because our chakra line is designed for ecstatic connection at all times. And so how we heal ourselves is through joy. But the more joy that you experience, the more sadness will move through you. And so it's a very bittersweet process to go through. But just knowing that dreams are our solution, we just start giving our attention to the potential of what we can do. And so in those moments where you're still awake and you're starting to fall asleep, that in-between space can be a really sweet spot to hang out in. And there's ways to stay there by sleeping in a particular position or being upright. So if you do fall asleep, you wake back up. And the more you learn to build that muscle for hanging out in those places, the more incredible your dreaming energy builds, which is sexual energy. And so when you take care of your sexual energy and sex becomes really sacred and you're not engaging in it just out of the hungry ghost, then you start to be able to navigate dreams because you're taking care of your power. And when we're in a power dynamic with a partner, there's a power exchange that we need to become conscious of, so that we don't take it for granted and we don't get confused about why we feel certain feelings around what's occurring within that dynamic. So learning to dream together as a couple, learning to focus on something and using that energy for some more pure innocent travel rather than coming together physically, that just opens the door to so much more, right? Because Tantra isn't about sex, it's just about being open and alive and connected electrically to life, to the earth, to the sun. And so shamans usually go through a period of celibacy as a means to understand how to balance their electrical self without needing another to assist them or to even need to be in fantasy or anything at all. So when I was 17, I didn't, I had an entire year without even a sexual thought because the castaneda material, it captured my attention. And they say extreme things in there, like you either have sex with your sexual energy or you dream with it. You can't do both. And turns out not to be true. Later they explain some people can. So it's just about going back to our conception and understanding what happened there and how to take care of our sexual energy based on the blueprint of how we came in. And the birth has a lot to do with that blueprint. And then the first kiss or the first abuse, different things happen, especially to women at young ages, that unfortunately our bodies keep the score and we have to deal with whatever traumas were introduced to us. But there is a revolution available within our personal capacity to become conscious in our dreams. But it doesn't have to be advanced. You can just start off just really tapping into the subtle layers of perception at first.
I just don't even know where to start with what you just said. It's so deep and so profound. And just for the listeners, when you say other layers of the onion, you're referring to other like dimensions, other timelines. How would you explain those other layers of the onion?
Yeah, so there are many realities, and then within every reality, there are multiple dimensions. And so within this reality, we can kind of go into different layers. And some of it's really like just overlays, like you can still see this world, but there's like other things kind of presenting, or just you might just have a moment which people would call like a bipolar or schizophrenic experience in which you're inside of this world, but with so much joy and magic, like on mushrooms or something, but you're just in a different layer slightly than most people. So it's very subtle. But like when I'm gazing at the world, all of a sudden this world starts to move. The branches become like a castle will appear inside of it's like I'm witnessing an old world architecture while I'm in the forest. So I'm partly seeing the forest, but I'm having a vision of something that's in another layer as well. And it's just so joyous to be able to hold that, to keep both at the same time. And then in dreams, it's like when you become conscious, you can zoom in on particular things and see all the details of these other worlds like cliffs and multiple moons and multiple suns and different worlds that are available to go into. So there are alien worlds and there are beings from other worlds that are observing us. And dreamers learn to go into those worlds. And you don't need a rocket ship to travel into these other worlds. Your dreaming body is that vessel. And so much of what we're told about how this place operates is designed to invert, to make us think, that we're only way we're going to be able to go to the next stage is through technology. But we are the technology. We dream technology. We are magical beings that can do all of this without any of the props. And in fact, the props take away the magic, and we're moving into a transhuman world intentionally so that our magic and medicine will no longer be of value, but in reality, forces are rising to meet each other. And so as that agenda rolls out, we're able to really establish and remember our capacity to do things naturally.
Yeah, before my life exploded, which I explained to you briefly in the email, I had a vision and I looked down at my hands and I was like, "Oh, we're the technology. It's not like AI that we're
Yeah.
waiting for. Like we are the technology, except it's not like microchips. It's like blood vessels and skin and like we are the technology." And when you mentioned, just going back a little bit, when you mentioned our sexual energy and our dreaming energy are
Yeah.
one and the same for women, especially like our womb space. So many
Yeah.
women are describing our wombs as this creative life force energy. And we're literally creating life and creating worlds and our creative energy as human beings. And sex is such a creative embodied act, and so many of the same hormonal cascades that are occurring in sex and orgasm occur in the birth process.
Totally.
And so it is all related. And so anyone who is supporting birth and empowering women to birth on their terms, they are also empowering our sexual nature, our sexual energy, and coming back to that root chakra,
Yes.
the sacral energy, going down into the depths of who we are. It's such a liberating process to
Yeah.
learn that you just need to go inward instead of looking for the answers in the external.
And a lot of what I help people with is everyone's trying to ascend, and I help people to descend, to go down to the earth. The earth is the electrical ground, and our ability to be grounded will make it possible for our ecstatic sexual energy to be able to rise and travel in other worlds. But we need to be able to go down and use darkness, which is the yin and the female. So a lot of people are avoiding the dark. There's nothing wrong with it. It's the place in which a woman discovers her power is in becoming wild in her sexual expression, not for a man, but for her own capacity to move that energy through her chakra system. That's when a woman can experience ecstatic connection to source on her own without being propped up by a man, without any false sense of securities. So these dynamics are tricky to navigate, but women are being given the permission now to really get to know how to open up, not for a man, but for them to become a lighthouse that will give permission for other women to do the same. And then that's where women become the oracles that guide men to help them to understand how they can ward and protect them in a way that is balanced and respectful of what that man is then offering, and so that there's support on both sides. And so we're in a time where conscious relationships are, so needed, but there's an uncomfortable stage to go through typically because there's unconsciousness in every relationship. There's holes in everyone's consciousness. And your partners, the closer you get, the more they're going to see your holes and you're going to see theirs. And so this dance of power, it's really intense. And we just have to go through honest stages of authentically admitting to frustrations or fears or jealousies instead of trying to be spiritual and bypass them and pretend that we're evolved. I see that a lot. Everyone's thinking they're much further along because they've been doing all this shadow work. My teacher would say, show up as a beginner in every moment and everything will be fine. But if you try to yourself, you've achieved something, then you're trying to uphold something. And that's just not gonna cut it when you're hanging out with shamans in the wilderness. There's no story of who you are that's gonna keep you protected. It's just whether you can keep up or not based on whether you're in tune or in your mind. Women typically go batshit crazy when they step into their power because they finally get a break from their mind and everything becomes lucid. And so I help people transition very carefully, go very slow, because the tapping into your power and learning how to run that energy leads to shamanic dreaming. And when you've had shamanic dreaming, it's so much more incredible than any sexual experience you can have. That life gets really intense as to what to do with your time and energy, and it's confronting element to a typical status quo relationship. We're in a very evolutionary process, and women are the ones that can basically lead when it comes to this, and being able to honor your yeses and nos will be the ability to make sure that the relationship can move into its evolutionary state or end. And it's very confronting to men when women step into their power. And but it's the only way men can get to know where they're really at is to how triggered they are. And then whether or not they're willing to do the work in order to communicate from this new place. So there's so much solution within a woman becoming aware of her power and then how that can affect our our species.
I had a mentor who said saying no and setting those healthy boundaries is the biggest act of love. Yeah, because for if we just keep being complacent and passive and tolerating abuse or whatever might be going on in certain dynamics, it's not good for the person who is, quote unquote, the abuser. It's not good for them either.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. It doesn't mean there's not going to be projections inside of that. It's going to be messy. It's not just clean, like the woman sees it all and the man is doesn't, you know. There needs to be an understanding on both parties that there's just stages of awareness that, and so hopefully each party is being given a vision of the potential of the relationship. And that's where vision work comes in, being able to listen to helpers, receive support from the sun and the earth, and be in communication with nature so that you're being shown how to navigate this terrain from where you're at without needing to be in some sort of idealistic state of awareness before you create boundaries. Like it's going to be messy. And there are powerful ways to argue. There are powerful ways to get to our passion. And when we allow and create space for deeper conversations, then things get fleshed out. Like it's there's so much healing that can happen, and both parties deeply want that healing, and it basically leads to what they both want sexually too. It's just they have different versions of how they think it's going to happen, and so there's so much armor. The more that we discover, the more vulnerable we get with our partner. We realize we're trying to control a situation through the only way we know how, which was taught to us by what was modeled to us. And so this is coming out of hypnosis, is to move into a much more magical layer of consciousness. And so we're inviting our partners to become more aware as we evolve. It's not just women. Often it's men that have to be like, there's erratic behavior occurring. You're saying things I don't think you mean. I need to be celibate for a period of time. And that can be very triggering for the woman. So sometimes it's flipped where the process is unveiled. So we just want to get to know what our unique relationship is and then how to navigate it in the most magical and strategic way possible. But I think having childlike pure affection is critical. That's where the dreaming consciousness becomes so incredible, is that you can explore that energy without it having to be physical or even in the realm of physical. And through breath work, through the movements I teach, really unique states of perception become accessible so that you're not dependent on ayahuasca or mushrooms. You just go right in and come out and really get to know how to use your sexual energy for dreaming or attention based practices.
I think this is really helpful for parents because there are so many challenges that come up as a couple co-parenting together and trying to raise a human or many humans. And this can be a really powerful way that you can reconnect and understand each other and come together so that so that we can raise the next generation from a place of just consciousness and being embodied.
Yeah, and sometimes involving a third party that can help communication can be key. It's just being where you're at, not needing to make it some sort of romantic, idealistic way in which you became evolved. Raising your hand and asking for help is one of the most vulnerable things you can do. And then being seen by another, and this is what I do. I help couples often, is just, and I don't claim to be in an evolved conscious relationship. I'm inside of a dysfunctional relationship, attempting to bring it into consciousness. But we started off really rough, and we're now having the best years. 30 years later, we're having the best years of our life, even though it's still dysfunctional. So people out there pretending they're in some evolved conscious relationship, I can always sort of see what they're not looking at, and they're upholding something. So I don't really trust people that say they figured it out, like it doesn't work that way. But if you're willing to find the right person to hold space for you in your process, it can be so magical to get that energetic assistance, that mirror, somebody that's willing to say things that are really authentic and blunt. There's just a lot of help.
Asking for help, especially anyone, but especially as parents. We need support. We need that village that is kind of we've been separated from in so many ways.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do want to go back to just the healing process itself and that descension that you're talking about because it relates on so many levels. In the birth experience, we need to be embodied. It is not an intellectual cognitive process at all. It
Totally.
is similar to when we're creating the baby, when we're conceiving the baby. It is sexual, it is creative, it is spiritual. We're in our bodies, it is spontaneous. And when we are birthing our babies, same thing. It's the same hormones, it's the same body parts, the reproductive system, the everything. It's creative. We need to be embodied. So healing
Mm.
itself, which there's a potential for healing in the birth process. I myself, I used to have a lot of pain around my menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
And after having my daughters, that's gone. So there can be a physical healing, there can be an emotional healing, an energetic healing, a spiritual healing, but it is about going into the body and letting the body guide us.
Yeah.
And I'd like for you to elaborate on that because it's not just about the birth process or parents themselves. It's every human.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, part of my training is I help people go into like an animal, get into their animal, pick an animal and act it out and get, really down close to the earth, like a snake or a cat. And there's a way to ground and feel these energy roots come out of your feet and go down into the earth and you'll feel, and it's just infinite as to how anchored and connected one can get. So like in martial arts, I'm not that large of a guy, but people that are twice my size can't move me because I've energetically anchored. I'm not relying on my physical. And so it's confusing to people, but that's what we want to get to know is how to be so embodied that we can become anchored so that we can properly feel safe within our field to be able to release emotion. And there's a need to be able to express during the birth. There's a need to be able to express during sex. If you're holding back your orgasm and you're not able to fully express it, it's totally different than when you're in a total release and fully in your primal power, expressing and freeing yourself from the limitations of that expression that are typically projected as to what's acceptable. And so becoming wild is an embodied thing, it went on in its true form. And so this wildness, being able to act out make crazy sounds, ugly sounds, get to know what's stored inside of you, practicing singing, things that where you'll discover your blocks, and then being able to step into your anger, which is a power, and use it in ways that are healing, so being able to emote and not being in a space in which you have to cover up anything, ideally, right? So construction's great because I can just belt out the word fuck really loud in the middle of the job site whenever I want. So it doesn't build up, it's like, but I see people that they're just building resentment and bitterness and anger, and it's just going to eventually be cause disease because our system needs complete and total expression as a means, and the only way to get there is to be embodied. And so martial arts or some form of body training, body awareness, I teach these movements that are super intense, that come from ancient Mexico, and they're not hard to do, and they will help people get in their body. So it's just a matter of picking something that is realistic and practical, something you can do all the time, not something that requires a particular place, but it's just something that you can take with you. And it can be uncomfortable at times as you begin this process because a lot of people are disassociated and they're avoiding feeling certain things by not being in their body. It takes courage to go into the areas you've been avoiding. So I found like a spiral staircase that goes down below me, and I just keep going down and down and down with my awareness. And there's like a fractured foundation down there. And rather than try to fix it, I just sit with it, and it's painful. It's like a homecoming because I'm being with my real pain. I'm not avoiding it. And I'm not saying I do this all the time. There's times where I do avoid it, but I don't beat myself up for that where I used to. And so it's this dance with accepting where we're at, but starting to make some progress towards being able to be with all of our parts. Because I have a rebel teen, I have a wounded boy, I have all these parts of me that sometimes take over if I'm not giving them attention and asking them what they need. And that can be done in a variety of ways with people that help me in that process, or I can do it on my own. But there is a way to get to know the multiple parts of ourselves and get them all having the same conversation together at one time. And that's what integration is. But until we've integrated, you know, we will be acting out from different wounded parts of us. And so this is an opportunity. Everything, any triggers that happen out on the road or in the world represent the shadow work that's undealt with. And when you're no longer at odds with things and you're not offended by people, then you can go do the most crazy things without losing your center. And so there's so much potential there.
You touched upon the inner animal
Yeah.
within us. Excuse me. And you even said the snake, and coincidentally this is the year of the snake in the Chinese zodiac. And a part of my medicine journey, I thought I was going to get in touch with my inner lion,
Yeah.
and it ended up being this inner snake, this ability to get in touch with that feminine
Yeah.
nature and shed my skin, shed my identity, let go of my ego in
Beautiful.
so many ways. And so getting in touch with that primal inner animal, and I'm sure it's different for everyone, can be so powerful. And in the birth experience, it is, can like, if you want to growl, can you growl? Can you give yourself permission to vocalize? And that actually opens up for women the cervix,
Totally.
and
Oh,
helps with pain management and all of that. So it is so related on every single level. And this dance that you talked about, this dance of, it reminds me of birth as well, this dance of contraction, that pain that when we avoid to face our darkness, our shadows, and then the expansion. But both are necessary for what we are to become.
in the movements I teach, it's all about, expanding and then contracting and expanding and then contracting. So the Toltecs say we have a mortal gap where our belly button is, and that we open up that gap and feel the world from our center. And then we also need to be able to close that gap because that's where death enters.
Mm.
And so our ability to become sensitive enough to feel the world from our center is what makes a dreamer conscious. And we have these long, luminous fibers that reach out and touch the world. Some people's are short and wounded, and they can't feel because of whatever trauma. But for people like myself, we're growing these fibers. They're getting brighter and bigger and more capable. And our ability to take care of our energy is what determines the health of our energy field. And then there's a way to purify your energy field. And that's through the recapitulating. So the movements lead to being able to recapitulate. The movements lead to being able to shape shift into different animals because you start to understand how to come out of your avatar in a sense and explore what it would be like to be in a different way. And you become an actor almost. You become like somebody that's getting to know the earth through animal actions and animal behavior, and you become capable of mimicking like just a bird or For me, when the birds fly by, it feels like I'm in the air with them. It's almost very ungrounding because I'm so connected to perceptual things. So I had to learn to get more and more grounded in order to handle that much intensity. So we're not separate from what we're observing. Shamans shapeshift into fog or clouds or the ocean. They can become the thing they're observing. And no one would be able to catch that. Scientists can't sit there and watch them because the world is magical and it's designed to protect people like that from getting caught. It's scary to people, so people would freak out if those kind of things were witnessed. And they would think that person's a sorcerer and needs to be burned at the stake, or it's crazy what can happen when you scare people who don't believe in magic. And so it's protected, everything's guided. And so it's okay to explore these arts. But Taisha Abelard in one of her books says, when all there is perception, then everything becomes perception. And so we are confining ourselves to our own limited reality because we're allowing this program that we think is our mind to create limitations. But in reality, that program, it's like a little boy with his hands in the cookie jar. He's afraid he's going to get caught in any moment. And that's what Toltecs do is they catch these beings and they have to be like, no, I'm not going to let you take this from me. And it pisses them off. And then they end up, kind of coming up with other tactics. But our ability to get silent has a lot to do with moving into the animal body, has a lot to do with being able to get grounded and to use the earth as an anchor. And then the earth will inform you. She has a form of communication. And the animals are the earth mother, according to the Toltecs. Like every animal you look at is the earth herself. And so we're interacting with the mother with the trees, with the birds, with the clouds, with fog. All of it is her messaging. And there's just a way to receive her omens and signs and guidance that makes it possible for you to be more earth-based rather than religious or outsourcing your power to a political figure or to some sort of tech guru. Or we don't need to be paying attention to what's happening. It's all the earth and sun is all we need. And then we have helpers as well, like ancestors and animal helpers, like and the Yeti, these beings that are in other layers of the onion that are magically trying to meet us in dream time and teach us about our own magic and medicine. And then there's interfering spirits that are kind of like lost, that are hungry ghost based, spirits of trauma, we call them. There's just so much to become aware of.
I can see why you need to be incredibly grounded to navigate all of this. And I want to go back just a little bit to the recapitulation practice that you mentioned, and what you can explain what it is, but also how it supports us, really. Like especially as parents, we're so drained, we're sleep deprived. From a Chinese medicine perspective, for a woman, every baby she has takes away from her essence and her yin and her qi. And for men, every ejaculation takes away from your essence and your qi. And so we need to kind of take responsibility of our energy again so that we can just function and ideally enjoy this life that we're experiencing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the recapitulation is life review, and it leads to reclaiming your youthful energy from your past events. And, like Don Juan was 90 years old and Carlos was 40, but Don Juan was half the age of the 40-year-old at 90 because he had reclaimed his youth and he had had children, but he was able to heal. And so anyone can do this work. But it's true, the more, even for men, the more children you have, more holes there are inside of your luminous field. And so there's a way to patch those holes. And once the children are raised and they have became capable of getting their own energy from the earth and the sun, whether they realize it or not, and that energy you lent to them returns to you. And so there's a shift that occurs when kids are no longer dependent on you. But our ability to recapitulate is whether it will determine whether or not we're able to purify. It's the most advanced form of purification that I know of. It's a breath practice, and you start with the most recent memories of your day, of your week or your month, and just start practicing reclaiming your essence from any scene where you may have left it. And you purge on the exhale, you're purging out any energy splinters you took on from other people or from their apartment or from an uncomfortable Airbnb that you rented that was haunted or whatever. Like there's just the strangest things happen and you get affected. And there's a way to sort of balance it. And it's basically just a head movement that is practiced. You exhale, place your head on one shoulder or the other. With your eyes closed, you're visualizing the scene and you're inhaling as you cruise all the way over to the left shoulder. And then when you get here, you're going to exhale. Now you're purging anything you took on from that scene. And then you get back, you start over, head straight, and set the memory up again or move into another memory. You're scanning. You're basically saying, no, I'm done with this. And it leads to being able to live in the now because you brought closure to that. And so it seems impossible to recapitulate all of your memories, but once you start, a muscle builds, an energy muscle that allows you to focus. And eventually you get called to put in like hours of work every day doing this. Whether you have the time or not, it becomes like a priority. And then you'll be able to regather your youthful energy and you won't feel the need for as much sleep as you thought you did. But there's stages to this. If you're in depletion, it's important to not push past that and honor your body's need to repair itself in any way possible. And so having a regulated nervous system is the first and foremost key. And a lot of it has to do with how we talk to ourselves throughout the day. So if our kids are a burden and they're in the way and they're triggering us and we're offended, there's no way that we're going to be able to be in a playful state of awareness with them. But often we're losing energy because we're trying to control the environment rather than adjusting and being playful in it. So for the adult to get down on the ground and to meet them at their level and to see the world the way they see it, it shifts your perception and then everything starts to flow. And then they start to honor your requests instead of trying to convince you or show you what you're missing through their confusion. And so I remember being with my daughter when she was like 2.5. She had this little kitchen, pretend kitchen, and she was trying to flip an egg. And you know, she was just totally immersed in this process of cooking. And I got down and I really met her on her level and I was like having a hard time and pretending that it was too hot and she just looked at me like, "Oh my God, there you are." Like, and it just shifted our relationship forever. And I started teaching her Aikido and we spent a lot of time in the grass exploring energy movement. And so how we invest in each relationship and how we come to terms with this stuff, it's all creative based. And there's a way, even if you haven't slept in days, to have so much energy come in through the creative process. In fact, sleep deprivation is one of the most powerful means to move one's perception. So I wouldn't sleep for days because of all the challenges in our family and stress and insomnia. And when I realized that I could still build houses without sleep based on how I perceived it, then I started to become energized instead of drained from the activities. And it was very uncomfortable. There's times where I had to go to work when that was the last thing I wanted to do, but I had no choice. I was financially had to be there. And so sometimes what seems like a negative thing, it's causing you stress and you're getting beat down. The solution isn't to try to change it, is to walk toward it. And when you tell yourself I'm exhausted, then you are exhausted. But if you tell yourself I can receive energy from the earth and the sun, I can use this opportunity to realize that I'm more capable than I thought. But when people start using Valium and different things, then they get caught in these really toxic cycles and they're not able to come out and it just gets worse and worse. So everything is perspective, everything is perception. Realizing though, a lot of parents are not told what the Chinese people talk about, that you're going to have less energy and that your child is running around with your energy and you don't have control over that energy. And so you can get in a power struggle with your kids that's unconscious because you didn't realize the tax it was going to take on you. And then you feel jealousy almost that they have this unlimited amount of energy and you're responsible for that and for them. And unless you come to terms with that, you're going to have some subconscious layers of confusion that are going to cause drainage, energy drainage, or frustration or sadness. So we want to admit to our longing to have our youthful energy and then figure out a way to go back and get it. Most people try to recapitulate and it's too difficult because it's a state of focus they're not familiar with. And that's where the movements that I teach, they're the first thing to learn is how to do these movements because they're designed to prepare you for the very act of recapitulating. And the recapitulation will make you youthful and light. And you'll start to do dreaming. Your dreams will start to get really magical and you'll untether from the physical world. That means you need to be really grounded, which brings you back to the movements. It just, you do the movements to recapitulate in order to do dreaming, and then you do the movements in order to get grounded even more to handle. So it's like a tree. If your roots don't go really far and wide and down, and you grow your branches too tall and wide, then the tree will topple in a windstorm. But if you've been able to use the movements to connect to the Earth Mother, then the recapitulation becomes something very, very magical that leads to the most powerful feelings from your past returning to you randomly. And we don't realize it, but there's entire sections of our lives we forgot about. And once you open that lid and remember one of those memories within, it leads to all these other memories. It's like they were stored in a treasure chest and you unlock the chest and all of a sudden all your youthful energy is there to interact with. And you get to go back to feelings from 6 months old and 1 years old and all the way back to the womb. So it's just infinite in its potential. But the forces that run this place, they do not like people doing this work. They will try to make sure you avoid this training because it's so simple. So they try to give you complex things like religion as a means to put you in a state of faith-based, wanting to believe. But this work that I teach, it's unavoidably effective. It's avoided though because of how simple it is.
Our brain just can't fathom that something so simple can give us our energy and our power.
That's not our mind. That's the program telling us that.
Going back to our energy, or from a Chinese medicine perspective, like our original qi, our
Yeah.
essence. When we talk about the imprint of conception, and you talked about sometimes it can be a really magical way, like sacred bonding between your parents, and sometimes it can be a very traumatic, less than ideal way. And how does that relate to your amount of energy throughout your lifetime, or
Mhm.
anything else?
It's not a negative, whatever happened. It's just that when you do understand how it began, then you have an understanding of why you are drained by certain things compared to other people who aren't. And you learn how to just take care of yourself based on what you discover. And so if you're being really honest with yourself, some people get drained from ejaculating more than others. Some women get drained from sex and other women are energized by it. And it's just being honest with that. Like, so what the Toltec say is most people were a product of a bored fuck, a common, just there was both parents didn't orgasm, the orgasm wasn't that strong, even if there was one. And then so the child was conceived under that conditions. It wasn't ecstatic, it was routine, there was mundane aspects to it. And so that child is going to, if they start on this path of knowledge, is going to have to more than likely spend a period of time being celibate in order to repair that, in order to build that energy up, practicing semen retention or finding other ways to orgasm. You don't have to release in order to have an orgasm. And so learning Tantra can completely change everything as long as you go the distance with the training. Not that I recommend, a lot of Tantra communities are pretty dark and things have gotten weird. So be careful who you train with and stuff. But there are systems out there that are pretty balanced and holistic that can help understand our energetic imprints. And it affects then your confidence in life. And typically, people who are products of a bored fuck are more likely to be able to do 9 to 5 shitty jobs that they hate and they don't ever rebel and they just keep doing it and doing it and doing it because they just don't have a reference for what it would feel like to be alive. Toltecs actually learned to go into shitty 9 to 5 positions without getting drained to prove to themselves that they've gotten over that stage, that they can keep their energy intact no matter how ridiculously unconscious the environment is. In fact, they seek out the most ego-based bosses that they can find in order to figure out where they are within how triggered they get or not, right? The world is magical. It's just our perspective of it and what stage we're at. And so, yeah, I mean, being honest with oneself about how you're impacted or affected. So I agree with the Chinese medicine to a point. There comes a point, though, where you discover your energy body as a man, and whether you ejaculate or not stops being an issue because you have so much sexual energy that it's very difficult to navigate how intense it is to have that much energy. You start being more creative and open to different ways of celebrating your life without limitations or fears. And it's only through not being afraid of ejaculating that deeper levels of tantra can be discovered. So sometimes it's just about coming out. Because like if you think that it's bad to ejaculate and then you do it anyways, now you're in a double bind because you have shame and guilt around the fact that you released. And then that's what drains you is that shame and guilt more than anything. And so a lot of these concepts can be entrapping and fear-based if we don't free them from those storylines. So Toltecs test their apprentices by putting them in situations within dreaming to see whether they saved their sexual energy or not. And then that just helps them to know how important it is to take care. But when you do discover dreams as a means, as a place in which you can use that energy, then you're able to move that energy from the genitals through your entire chakra system and insulate yourself inside of your essence. And that's where the most profound healing happens. And that's where dreaming is revealed, is in those sacred states in which you redistributed that energy. And that's what the movements I teach is a redistribution process. And usually, the Toltecs say that humanity is run through its genitals. And there's a way to stop being under the influence of these forces by getting to understand when and how to redistribute that frustrated energy without having to move it into the sexual. You can just, okay, this is a lot of energy. I'm going to use it for going into the mountains and hiking and see what happens on the other side of that. And there's so many rewards you get for not going, just allowing that energy to overwhelm you and having to release it. There's a way to, interact with it. And so whether we're a product of a bored fuck or whether our parents were, conceived on ecstasy after a rave and it was all this incredible heart-opening magic, there's still unconscious pieces that came with each conception. And that will prove to be like a part of your shadow journey, is to get to know what was passed on to you. And so my friend was conceived on LSD, magical sexual orgasms on both parties, but he spent most of his life, you know, in and out of jail because that was too much energy for this place. He had too much power and he didn't have the capacity to sort of catch himself And then he ended up having to do a lot of drugs to diminish the energy because it was too much to have, and then that leads to real difficult health stuff. So it's not like there's this idealistic version out there. It's just that everyone's formula is different, and we don't want to compare ourselves to other people. And that's why I don't always agree with Chinese medicine, is sometimes they speak blanketly, and other systems as well, where it's just like, we're not lab rats. Everyone's different.
Hmm. My mind went to medicalized conception, and
Mm.
there's no judgment. Obviously, every that comes to be was meant to be. But I wonder what kind of imprint that is having on the life.
Me too. I mean, it's getting scary what we're doing, and it's leading to like test tube, like little incubators where there's no parents at all. We're trying to grow life without the womb. Like, it's going to become really hard to come to terms with, I think, and it's not an easy thing to face and realize, but all the more reason why those of us that are earth-based and aware and sensitive, that we learn as much as we can about becoming authentic and seeing the difference.
Mm.
But yeah, I think you're going to see those kinds of people are that much more easily more manipulative and hypnotized even more. And that's ideal for the powers that be to be able to control. But there's a backlash that comes with that.
I think what we're seeing now is necessary for the people who feel called to awaken, so to speak, and come out of this hypnosis that you're talking about. And I'm curious about how to relate to what we see in the world that can really, really affect us on an emotional level, on a mental level, like war, genocide. And how can we take care of our energetic body
Mm.
when we are affected by what we see out in the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's important not to skip any stages and allow your body to express any confusion that it is witnessing. So healthy emotional release, learning to be able to properly feel without trying to be mature, allow your little girl to throw a tantrum. Different parts of you that are comfortable need to be experienced. But ultimately, we're in a dream. And so the things that we think are so, we take our lives so seriously, and we're so in the mindset that even though we're feel like empathic or whatever, we're actually just not wanting to feel certain feelings, but they're necessary feelings to feel. And so we try to like figure out a way to buffer or protect ourselves. And so the Russian dreamers I know, they don't watch, they don't pay attention to anything. They have no idea what's going on in the world. They're not tapped into any of it whatsoever. And their dreaming is just incredible because of it. So you don't need to pay attention. We used to not know. We used to live so far away from everybody, and there wasn't this means and method to share what's going on with everyone. And so people were telepathic, and they're able to communicate from a different place because we weren't relying on one source of, and most things that are occurring, they're happening for a karmic reason. And our judgment of them or thinking it's right or wrong isn't, we don't necessarily understand what's being played out. Often it's through really difficult situations that warriors are established. And so rather than project fear or worry onto anyone or anything, we understand that it's happening for them, not to them, that it's a rite of passage that will lead to their becoming awake and aware on a level that we wouldn't be able to. And so they're developing consciousness in areas that we're not. And then you become an anthropologist by observing humanity and how it reacts, how offended it is, and what kind of stories get established from there.
Yeah, I had the thought, and probably because my mind is in the birth world, that what is happening right now, and for me, I have roots where there is a lot of conflict, like in the Middle East, and so my DNA, I
Mm.
feel I'm getting messages
Mm.
on both sides, like if there are sides, And I had the thought that this was our opportunity as women and humanity collectively to understand that we can birth peace.
Wow, beautiful. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's what it takes is a creative visionary to step into a path of heart and to be willing to do what is needed inside of that path of heart. And so I'm not saying we should try to not get involved. It's just that if we're attached to outcome, then we won't be able to be as effective in what our messaging is, because we'll be triggered by what is playing out, and there's a way to become resilient enough to just walk on that path of heart knowing you're doing your best, and then failing is doesn't exist if you're truly to giving it your all.
I wanted to come to the idea of death because we keep talking about fear, and so much of our fear is based around death.
Yeah.
And you talk about bringing death in to your field and how that serves us.
Yeah, death is the advisor that will, it's the only one that'll be honest with you. And so death is a force that is stalking us. So life, we're not just unconscious creatures that are just inside of, an experience. We are being observed, how we behave, how we react, what we eat, what we do. And death is, so like shamans say that life is the arena and death is the player. So becoming conscious of your mortality is what brings you out of hypnosis. We act as if we have all the time in the world. We may be aware and speak about the fact we're going to die, but we don't behave as if we're going to die. And that's what needs to change. If you start to consider that you might disappear at any second, and you stop taking things for granted, you stop doing things that you don't want to do, and you only do the things you really want to do. That has to do with grandparents and expectations from family, being the pattern breaker, being the one that the black sheep of the family that stops forcing their kids to go sit in uncomfortable situations that are just generational patterns. And it's offensive to the pattern keepers. And I'm not saying we want to disrespect our elders, but we have to find a way to free ourselves from this immortal behavior. We're not immortal. This is all going to end way too quickly. But there's a way to slow it down. And so there's a way to bring death in as a consciousness. It's hard to have your death with you unless you're alone. And so learning to spend time alone, creating a way to be with yourself so that you can feel your death and start to become friends with it and ask it to tell you what to do. What should I do with this situation? How do I navigate this? And death will tell you, I have yet to touch you, so this is no big deal. And that perspective is what's needed. So we don't get all worked up over things that really don't matter. We start to pay attention to what really does matter, those deathbed conversations. Why wait till our deathbed to say what we mean, to feel all the feelings? We want to feel them today. And you don't have to share them with somebody. The earth will receive you as you go through those feelings. And then when you have people that you can be real with, then you can show them your pain and you can be witness. And then life just opens up. Like death, it respects you. It tells you how to have fun, teaches you to stop following rules. You got to be a rule breaker in order to become individuated from the pack, So you have to become a lone wolf, but you also then have to learn to find a wolf pack. Otherwise, because a lone wolf eventually is a dead wolf. And boundaries is part of that. Like the universe cannot honor you if you're entangled in all these toxic relationships. It's not going to open the door for new ones. It's testing you to see if you can shut those relationships down as a means to self-care. It's not personal to the people, although they might take it personal. And so there's just opportunities to become so boundary that you become boundless. And it's through joy and falling in love with your existence and not needing others to validate you, that makes it possible to unbind from the common fear that keeps us from being able to communicate with our dead.
When my mom passed away a couple of years ago, of course, I was devastated, but it was also such a gift because it put my existence into perspective. Like, oh, I don't have as much time as I thought I did.
Yeah.
Life is short and I have these girls to raise. And out of that devastation, that darkness, birthed this new life that I'm creating for myself. Yeah, this podcast and the way that I'm interacting with my patients and what I'm offering and how I'm parenting. And so death can be a huge gift.
Yeah. For me too. When my mom crossed it, like, well, so I was offering her an alternative way of dealing with the cancer, and my dad was so afraid of that that he convinced her to just poison her to death instead. And it's just so brutal to watch that, like, and she even admitted to me, like, I'm doing this for him. And so just to be, but what happened was I got to meet my real mom because she was facing her death. So she stopped watching The View and stopped drinking every night. And she moved into this unique state of silence. And for her to be suspended in that death state for periods, weeks, months, and just watching that process, I was able to introduce her to concepts and ideas that I discovered, and she was willing to meet the medicine woman I was training with, and they became very close. So death isn't a negative; it's just that an awareness. And so when we get closer to death on any level, but she developed cancer because she felt so bad for her best friend who had cancer that she took it on. And that woman got cancer because her child had leukemia and she was willing to do anything to save him. So she prayed to give it to her so that her child could be free of it. And it all comes from all this medical misinformation and tests that are not accurate. And it all started with, just poisoning a young man at 5 years old when it wasn't necessary. We're just inside of such a twisted system, but it all serves as necessary jolts to those of us that are able to come to terms with how this place operates.
And it always leads back to reclaiming our power as humans in every arena.
Yeah. And often saying no,
Yeah.
being able to say the word no and mean it. And because when you're in those situations where they're telling you this is the only way we know how to help you, you get overwhelmed with that projection. And yeah, it can even be looked at as child abuse or neglect to not. So finding your rights and your power within the system, it's a scary place, but it's part of the design to become aware of how bad it can get if we don't wake up.
And trusting ourselves on that process.
The intuition is everything. We just our gut will guide us, and it's very much a powerful tool to develop. And so I understand why people have such cognitive dissonances. They just have no relationship with their instincts because they're not in their animal body.
Again, coming back to that animal body being embodied. So, Joel, before we head off, I like to ask all of my guests this question. And we talked about the imprint of conception, we talked about the imprint of birth. I call it the profound imprint because it's our entry point into this reality. And what happens in that state lasts a lifetime. And it's
Yeah.
not permanent. We can do things to repair, like the state that our mother was in, that our father was in, that we of course are in because we're so connected. But why repair if we can do this kind of proactive work of empowering ourselves? But with that being said, what would you like to imprint onto the listeners? As I mentioned, it's a lot of parents preparing for birth. It's a lot of new mothers and a lot of people who want to birth something beautiful into this world. What would you like to imprint onto their ears?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. Just to remind you that you have a unique gift to discover that is not like anyone else's. And it's an inner journey in order for that to be revealed. And it's the most beautiful homecoming, but it's by going toward your pain rather than trying to avoid it. And it's by admitting that you're in pain, which you may not be able to yet, but I'm just planting that seed that it is through any wounding or hungry ghost or any feeling of not being able to express yourself as a child, there's some sort of armor that is keeping you from connecting to source directly. And rather than try to cover that up, the great work of our times is to go toward it. And on the other side of that is a trophy of creativity and magical inheritance. It may have not been passed on through your parents, but someone in your ancestry line was a very magical, aware being that is there in place to assist you. You're not alone. There's tons of help. And it's just becoming sensitive enough to receive that support and those messages. But we all have magic and medicine. And if we don't learn to use it, it'll turn on us and life will get really difficult. So everything's happening for you because when it gets difficult, it's to show you that you're not using your natural gifts and you're trying to copy somebody. Authenticity is the greatest currency that exists, especially during this time. And it feels so good to be honest with yourself. And it can be uncomfortable, but it's in the uncomfortable that we move away from the familiar. We move into the unknown. And that's what a warrior, that's where warriors are created, is inside of those unknown places where you discover resources that you wouldn't have known about had these challenges not been presented. So it's alchemy, it's magic, it's medicine, and it's infinite in its potential.
Thank you, Joel. I want to echo, I've experienced that in my own life. The more I go into the wound, face the darkness, the more creative, the more authentic I feel. Just kind of validating what you're saying in my own life. Thank you so much again for taking the time to do this. Truly an honor. If people want to connect with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, joelschafer.com. It's SCHAFER. And I also have a YouTube channel called Perceiver. It's joel.schafer on Instagram. And I do free consultations. Feel free to reach out. And it's always good to just meet people. So I do these courses online that are ongoing and in-person workshops. But most people just meet with me for 90-minute sessions for mentoring. After doing the 30-minute consult, they tend to want to continue. And so it's just a matter of, yeah, just reaching out and connecting and finding a time to talk. So appreciate the opportunity to be with you today and so glad I could speak to your audience and look forward to hopefully speaking again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joel.
You're welcome.